Welcome to Ferment Radio, a podcast series on bacterial and social fermentation. Fermentation can incite social action, spark creativity, and bring surprising new tastes to our lives. My name is Eva Bakkeslett, and I invite you to join us in a conversation on living interconnectivities, from macro to micro, from cellular to societal, and from global to personal. This episode is about transformations, especially those that take place when we ferment food collectively. As the contents in fermentation jars change their taste, people's relationships evolve and everyone tunes into a microbial time. There is physical and mental inspiration when we work with bacterial cultures. We will hear a lot more about this in our conversation with Eva Bakkeslett. Eva is an artist exploring the potential for social change through gentle actions and subtle mind shifts. You can also call her a gentle or culture activist. By revealing and reclaiming forgotten or rejected practices, concepts, and cultures, her work connects us to the earth as a living organism. Eva lives on the island of Ingeloya in the north of Norway. She grows and harvests her own food and learns as much as possible about life and sustainability from old folks, animals, birds, trees, and the earth. One might imagine wintertime in northern Norway to be like a cold and endless night. How does she actually experience this time of the year on her island?
Well, right now I'm sitting in my studio and I got the fire going with wood, birch wood that I've chopped myself. And so I'm living on an island, and on one side of the island we see the Lofoten Islands, this famous, beautiful group of islands that stick out into the West Fjord, it's called, and I'm facing slightly the other side. So I've got beautiful mountains on either side. They're all snow-capped at the moment, and because the sunshine doesn't come above the horizon, the mountains are, I call it the ice cream time, because all the mountains get covered in covered in all this sort of ice cream colors, from vanilla and sort of mottled blueberries and pistachio green and strawberry colored. So it's ice cream time. It's stunningly beautiful, and it always makes me appreciate just being alive, looking at this. And people think that when the sun disappears it must be pitch black, but it's actually it's pretty pitch black at some time of the day and night. But when the 4 hours of the day when it's light, it's pretty stunning and worth it. I was born here originally, and I lived here for the first 4 years of my life, and then I moved to Sweden, and then I came back to Norway for a few years, to the north of Norway, and then I lived in England for many years. So altogether I've lived here half of my life, I say. So I moved back here 20 years ago to this particular place. I moved 20 years ago, but I've been away for 6 of these 20 years. So, but I'm pretty rooted in this place, I would say. It's the place I've lived the longest in all my life. Growing up in this, steeped in this wilderness, you feel so attached to it somehow. It's a mental attachment, and I've never, and I, a lot of people I know experience this. They move away somewhere else, and you feel this sort of longing. There is something very, very deep and essential, elemental, I would say, deep inside you that almost pushes you back to this place. And for me, it was such a strong pull, especially when I had children, that I just wanted them to grow up and experience this wilderness and this particular chemistry of and stories and beauty that I'm surrounded with here.
it really talks to me because I was born in a city and I kind of feel I need to rebuild this connection to nature or the land because it was never kind of a part of my childhood or like a growing up time. Yeah, I feel it. I think I am on the other side. I'm a person who totally needs to kind of figure it out for myself because it wasn't something which was given or like which would be present in my life.
No, and I suppose that wilderness or that nature connection. I mean, we're all part. I mean, cities are also part of nature. So, but it's this wilderness connection. I suppose it is a pretty unique experience having had that in your childhood. But it's also, of course, possible to connect to at if the pull is strong enough at a later. But it's also quite demanding. I am an artist. I also call myself a cultural activist because whatever I do with my art, it's like a sort of connection with a sort of cultural activism. With culture, I define it as being in contact, in connection with the land. The word culture comes from the Latin word cultura, and the cultura means to prepare the ground for something to emerge out of. And that kind of nurturing, it implies the nurturing of the earth, that word. And of course our the word cultura has the word culture has taken loads of different ways, and in our mind nurturing the ground is perhaps something that doesn't come to our mind when we think of it, but that is the origin of the word. And when I think of the word culture, for me it's about nurturing the ground and looking deep into it and being inspired at being part of it, really. And of course we come from the earth, and we go back to the earth, so we're all earth beings, we're all cultural. And that's what I feel, that's what I do very much in my life, and my life and my art is very much intertwined. I don't really separate one from the next, one from the other. Yeah, they're very amalgamated, and I've always wanted to knit this close bond with everything I do. And I suppose I get better at it as years go by. And I work with. I'm very interested in transformation processes, and in particular, I've been working a lot with bacteria and the process of fermentation for many years, and been very, very pulled to this, and done it in all kinds of ways, as workshops or as in films or as in more kind of physical some object based work.
I also saw on your webpage that you describe yourself as a gentle activist. How one can become this kind of activist?
Well, a gentle activist is someone, I suppose, who are not working with very big, explosive, barricade stuff. It's more kind of the small, almost invisible processes, I would say. That's how I would define a gentle activist. So a butterfly, for instance, is perhaps a gentle activist when a butterfly um, um, flies with his wings and it causes, a storm on the other side of a hurricane on the other side of the world. That's a type of a good analogy for a good metaphor for a gentle activist. And I would say a gentle activist is somebody who makes subtle changes, or who has, if I when I do gentle activism, I get something moving and get some ideas moving and get some conversations moving, and generally introduce helpers like bacterial communities, and then together we make something and do something, and then a process starts happening, and then hopefully that process will spread into the way that we think, or the way that we look at the world, and the way that we subsequently do things and act, and that's that's what I'm hoping that would be the result of gentle activism.
I'm also thinking about what you said about this merging your life and work together and getting better at it. How do you rest, or how do you like regain your energy?
In that respect, I do feel quite related to farmers, and because I live in a rural area on this in the north of Norway, it's I have quite a few farmers around me, and they live in the rhythm of the year and in the rhythm with the animals and with their surroundings, and I live like that as well. I feel, because I grow a lot of my own food, and I live, and here the seasons are very, very strong. So I live with the seasons, and I definitely live with the seasons, definitely live with the land, and with my, my work is just intertwined in everything. So I rest more in the winter. Also because it's dark, and I can, I live more of I do more of the sort of research base of my work and the inside base of my work there, and in the summer it's I just do everything outside, and a lot of the work that I can do outside of my my sort of active art work also happens in the summer.
You work, or very important place in your work has fermentation. You've mentioned already that, but I am just curious, what are you, or is there something you are fermenting physically at your home at the moment?
Well, I always have a variety of ferments going. Apart from, life is a ferment. If you start outside, I have a big compost heap that's fermenting at the moment, and I have several buckets and big containers full of bokashi ferments, which is a type of composting that ferments, and that I use on my vegetables. And then inside, I have a lovely kombucha that I got from a fantastic, now a good friend of mine who I made a film about many years ago up in northern Russia. She had this wonderful kombucha there, and I'm related to her through the kombucha, which is fantastic. And I got an incredible sourdough that originates from Russia, that was given to me by Andrew Whitley, who used to be a BBC journalist, who worked a lot in Russia. And he fell in love with rye bread sourdough traditions in Russia, and brought home a jam jar full of sourdough, and changed his life basically. He was, he stopped being a journalist and started baking bread. And I had him on one of my very first bread event, actually, in England, the Companion Festival of Bread in 2007. He was there, and he gave me the sourdough from then, and I managed to somehow keep it alive. And sometimes I've lost it, and I had to go out into my big network of people who I've given it to through events, and got it back again. And then I've got a lovely kefir that I was given by a Greek lady in London. And it was funny, that the story when I got it, because we had connected through this fermentation network when I was living just south of London, and so we said, "Oh, let's meet in this at the London Bridge railway station on a Friday at 6 o'clock," which is possibly the busiest time. Not a Friday today, because it's now it's lockdown is over, but it was super busy, people everywhere, and we hadn't sort of agreed on what we looked like, or to wear a red rose or something. But somehow I stood there, and I was looking out for this lady, and I was thinking, I wonder, is it her? No, it can't be her. Is it her? And suddenly she turned up, and we just knew. We just looked at each other, and then we just knew we were both fermenters. So she, out from her pocket, she pulled this white substance, and we exchanged, and had a little chat, and off we went. So I'm related to her through the kefir. Yeah, and then I got a slightly neglected rummacolla at the back of my fridge. A rummacolla is a northern milk ferment, and I managed to get hold of it. Actually, somebody had brought it to America. So that emigrated with immigrants from Finland, actually, in the form of viili, which is very related to the Norwegian drummerkål, and so some immigrants brought it to the US when they moved over there 100 years ago, and then they started cultivating it there, and it survived, and I managed to get it back from Washington state. They're growing it in, and then that's also living at the moment in my life. That's part of my collection of fermented heirlooms in my fridge at the moment. And then I'm making some kimchi. At the moment I'm picking some. I'm harvesting the last of my cabbage, and making some sauerkraut out of that. So there's a lot of bubbly jubblies all over the place. I suddenly, in my head, popped this the beginning of my fermenting life. No, it's not the beginning. The beginning is the very beginning when you're born. I was in England at the time, and I was doing a master in art and ecology. I was making a film about bread, and I'd put a microphone in the bread dough and heard the amazing language of bread. The bread was speaking to me, and it was making smattering noises. And I was fascinated by this and thinking, wow, I just want to go deeper and delve into this.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. That's you've heard basically the calling of a sourdough when you when you recorded that. It sounds a little bit like that.
Yes, it's things come to you at the right time, and it's all up to you to look at it and open up the possibilities that these things offer to you.
Yeah, maybe it's a bit like with fermented foods, right? That there is this moment when they are ready to be consumed.
Exactly. And that's also so interesting, I feel, because there are so many different ways of going into it. And of course, you can do it all by the book, and you just do it like this, or you can bake, like baking sourdough. It's some people profess that, oh, you should do it like this, and then you have to wait then, and then you sort of turn it every hour and then put it in the fridge, and then you get a perfect loaf of bread. But you can make a sourdough bread in a totally different way, and I've baked with people from all over the world who've got sourdough traditions, and they all have their quirks and their totally different ways of doing it. Of course, there are some related bits, but generally there are so many different ways of doing it. And basically, for me, what's interesting is to observe the microbial community and see what they're up to, and then just go with it and learn to collaborate with them instead of imposing this concept that you've learned from somewhere, or this recipe that you read, and imposing it on them.
What would be the most important lessons you learned from bacteria or all the fermentation you've practiced so far?
Well, there's so much, but maybe it's possible to boil it down to three things, and it's really taught me a lot of lessons about time. That time is this very relative thing, concept rather, not a thing, and that you can, when the time is right, um, it's you can't just say that it takes 40 minutes or it takes 3 hours. For instance, when you're baking a sourdough bread, it's all depending on other factors like temperature and humidity and time of year and conditions, basically. So time is a flexible concept, and to have that flexibility within it, and just see it as a relative concept rather than putting anything more into time. Time is relative, and it's nothing more to it. And that's a big. It's like understanding it. Reading it is one thing, but really understanding it through working with the microbial world, it's like, it's a wonderful thing. You just realize that these guys live in a different time frame, and and conditions, the conditions have to be right. It's like it's the same with this amazing, with seeds that can be dormant for a long time. That same bacteria can be dormant for such a long time, and then when the conditions are right, then they flourish again. That's what's so exciting now. Well, maybe it's people. Some people are dreading it. The bacteria that are waking up in the ice and on the ice caps at the moment. Of course, that's terrifying. The potential of that is terrifying for some people, but it's also quite exciting the way that these little beings have been there, like in the fairy tales, been sleeping there and now waking up, and suddenly just sort of shaking up because the conditions are right. It's quite remarkable that they can be dormant for so long. It's really so, and when the conditions are right, suddenly they spring back into life. I mean, what an incredible ability to just encapsulate yourself into this little bubble, time bubble. So I think that is just fuels me endlessly thinking about the amazing capacities of creative capacities and life, that strong life force in the microbial world. I'm inspired by the microbes as artists because I've always once I started learning more about them, I just realized that not only were they great conjurers and sort of performance artists, that they can transform all these incredible substances and transform them into all kinds of different ways, but they're also inventors in the evolutionary process, which is really intriguing. And what's also incredible with the microbes is that they are such a creative gang of forerunners, in a sense. They're shapeshifters that find ways of transforming their communities, and especially in these times of crisis, we should really, there's another reason for looking at the microbes, because they have survived and thrived in times of crisis and gone through those transformation processes so many times. And in the first 2 billion years of life on Earth, bacteria have continuously altered the planet's surface and atmosphere, and they've invented all the essential chemical substances necessary for this life. And they were really biotechnologists. They were inventors of biotechnologies, and in that invention mode, they invented fermentation and photosynthesis and oxygen breathing, and also the amazing process of fixating atmospheric nitrogen into proteins as well, which is it's quite an incredible, and that is through collective work. It's not the work of one microbe, one bacteria. It's this collective brain or organism that comes up with these solutions, which I'm fascinated about how they come to that process, how they come to these inventions. And of course, in all their inventions and in all their ways of living, they've also caused crisis, like because they've exhausted their food, they had to find other ways of like, that's how photosynthesis happened. Because of starvation, they had to invent that. And they also suddenly, because when they invented oxygen, suddenly there were lots of bacteria that couldn't survive because they couldn't breathe. So either they had to die or they had to transform, and some of them just disappeared into this dark corners of the world, like right into the deepest pools and under the oceans, and they're still there. That's the amazing thing. They didn't want to change, so they just stuck to those little puddles and those sort of deep corners of the world. But
they are the outcasts.
But so incredible with them is that problems, the bacterial world often turn problems into opportunities. And I think that's where we have so much to learn from them, and often we look at the great answers in big things, and I think the bacteria have been around for the longest, and they have really been, and because they're such a big part of us as well, we just can't ignore the fact that everything in our lives are depending on them, and we should really it's a reason why we should be obliged to get to know them from an early stage and really encompass them and honor them, I think.
Would you see this changing kind of perception of those two things in relation to social fermentation? How do you understand social fermentation itself? Of course, you can answer in whatever order you want. So, social fermentation, and if this time and conditions could be seen as like a component of social fermentation.
So, social fermentation is something. It's like a concept that I worked with a lot in my work, and how I define it. I mean, I'm sure you can define it in different ways, perhaps, but the way that I see it is um, being inspired by the ways that bacteria live, and also this particular concepts that we've been talking about, time and conditions. If you create spaces that are inspired by bacterial transformation and by fermentation, and by the time frames and the conditions that transform, that make the conditions right for transformation of bacteria, then it creates a particular culture with humans as well, and you get this bubbly fervor that spreads in this collaboration, in this spaces of collaboration, and there is an inspiration that is very physical as well as mental from working with the bacterial cultures, and there is a transformation that is happening in the room and between the people, as well as with the substance that you're working on, if you're baking bread together or making kimchi or whatever it might be. There is an extended form of fermentation, a social fermentation, which is really exciting to be part of when it happens. And then the produce, is not that important, really. Of course, it's amazing to share the what you've made, but it's also the process is so important. Learning from each other and listening to the microbes along the way. It's lovely being defined by your schedule being defined by something non-human, and something that has its own time frame, that is an organic process, which I think it's also something that is it's good to unlearn the habits that we've learned from being in this sort of human 9 to 5 time frame, and being within a microbial time frame. In this social fermentation spaces, you mix ingredients just like you would in a bread dough, and the ingredients here in this case is humans and microbes. And if you're working with sourdough bread, you need some flour, and you need some water, and you need some tools, and you need some, you can put in whatever ingredients you want. That's what differs my work as an artist to somebody who gives a course in sourdough bread making. It's like I frame it in a different way, and make these spaces for social fermentation.
It once happened to me that I was talking with one art funding, I don't know, bureaucrat, let's say. And when she heard about fermentation kind of workshop as an art form, she asked me, "So where is art there?" If she would ask you that question, or any other person, how would you answer to that?
Well, it's a question I've been I've been asked as well from lots of different people, and I would say, first of all, I can say that question used to be, I used to get that a lot when I started working with these things about 13, 14 years ago, but now there's a shift that's happened. I would say in the last 5 years or so. It's been a shift, and a lot more people know about fermentation, are excited about it, and can totally see how that it can be related to art. But to people who ask me that question, I would say it's art is always about fine-tuning your senses, and as an artist, I see my role as helping other people or inspiring other people to fine-tune their senses and to look at the world from a different perspective. And I think everything I do as an artist is about communicating that. And it's about giving people, it's like giving people glasses to look at the world from another place. And the fermentation is all about the process of transformation, and going into it from as I was explaining, from this artist perspective, when you go deeper into the questioning and to the playfulness and into the aesthetic perspectives, it is all a big process of transformation, and that's what you get from it. And the process itself and being a part of that experience is a transformative process. So that's the artwork.
That was Eva Bakkeslett. You can find more about Eva's work on her webpage www.evabakkeslett.com. If you would like to know more about the show, listen to this episode again, or find previous episodes, please go to fermentradio.com. You can subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. I'm always looking forward to hearing from you at hello@fermentradio.com. Ferment Radio is brought to you by Culture of Cultures and is produced by Super Eclectic. Thank you for listening. Keep fermenting and stay tuned for the next episode of Ferment Radio.